Thank you for joining me today for Champaign-Urbana Jewish Federation's Holocaust Education Podcast Series. I am joined today by Courtney Smith, the Committee Chair for the Holocaust Education Center at the Champaign-Urbana Jewish Federation. She is the owner, lead historian of TimeBridge Historical Research Solutions and a Holocaust historian. Courtney, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Elizabeth. I am appreciative of the opportunity to be here.
Before we get into what led you to the CUJF Holocaust Education Center, tell me a little bit about your interesting and diverse past. How does one go from a train conductor to a firefighter and an EMT to a historian?
It's kind of a long story, but I'll give it to you the long story short. When I was 16, 17, about a junior in high school, I made the decision that I wanted to enlist in the United States Navy. And I ended up kind of going behind my parents' backs, and I actually applied for the United States Naval Academy. And I had gotten a letter of recommendation from Congressman Rodney Davis, and I got accepted to their summer seminar for the graduating class of 2018. And I had gotten a knock at my door inviting me to show up to Annapolis, Maryland that summer of 2013, so going into my senior year. And I went there, I spent my time there. I was pretty dedicated to getting to go to the academy. Unfortunately, that following fall, my senior year, there was a huge government shutdown, and they were getting really picky about who they selected to go to that class. And I don't have a thyroid gland, so waivers were getting hard to come by. And I ended up not going into the military and kind of just saying, well, I don't know what I'm going to do next, but I need to do something. During my time in high school, I had volunteered on my local fire department. I had attended community college for fire science. I became a certified fire technician, and I also went to weld school because my senior year they had canceled the firefighting program. And so in order for me to graduate on time with my class, I had to take welding. So I'm also a certified welder. Other than the Naval Academy, I didn't really have any other college options. I was do or die. I'm going to the military, and that's that. That ended up happening, and I set my sights on, well, not sure I want to be a welder. I'm going to play at the railroad. And kind of a funny story, my dad actually worked as a train engineer there for 20 years plus, and actually arrived and came to my interview and told them not to hire me because it's a rough job. You don't want your teenage daughter working there. And as soon as he left, I went right back in there and I'm like, hey, I want this job. They offered it to me on the spot, and I worked there for about 6 months and realized probably wasn't the job for me. And I went back to Richland Community College. I started taking EMT classes, became a certified EMT. Then I went on to get my paramedic, and I worked as an EMT paramedic for a few years. My husband actually took a job at the University of Central Florida, and we moved there. And then after COVID, unfortunately, he lost his job. We moved back home, and I started going to school at the University of Illinois to pursue my degree in history. While at the University of Illinois, they don't have any courses that are currently on the Holocaust, so everything I've done is pretty much self-taught. However, when I'm not studying Holocaust history, one of the things I am very privileged to do with the University of Illinois Springfield is Lincoln Studies and the Civil War and Reconstructions. That's my other passion.
Your Holocaust interest, for lack of a better word, didn't start in grade school when you first learned about it. I believe in Illinois, they start teaching about it in fifth grade. It didn't start in high school. It was later after high school that you started to delve into the Holocaust history.
Not necessarily. I remember first being exposed to the Holocaust in seventh grade, and my knowledge back then was very limited. I believe we were still watching The Boy in Striped Pajamas, which was a relatively new movie at the time, but as I now know, we actually don't recommend teachers showing The Boy in Striped Pajamas because it has been proven that the younger you show that movie to students, the harder it is to get them to empathize and later learn factual, correct information about the Holocaust. It was always on the back burner of my mind. I've always loved history, I've always been very passionate about it. When I was working as an EMT paramedic, I had exposure to a lot of trauma calls. And within my first 2 years being back here in Illinois, I started going to therapy for PTSD. And I had a therapist give me a book, A Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And I had mentioned to him that I had this opportunity to interview Ava Schloss, or at least listen in to Ava Schloss. And if you don't know who Ava Schloss is, I have one of her books. This is Anne Frank's posthumous stepsister. Her mom married Otto Frank. And she was set to come to Florida State University in 2019. Something had happened. She lives full time in England, and she had gotten sick, and then COVID happened, and then it kind of fizzled out. She wasn't making any more trips. She's in her 90s, so I don't blame her. I actually reached out to someone on her management team. I went on her website and I explained, "Hi, I missed this opportunity. I would really love to get to hear from you. Do you know when Ava's going to have another meeting?" And they said, "Well, actually, she has some time for a Zoom interview. She would love to sit down with you." Back in 2022, she sat down for a Zoom interview with me, and I'm old school. I handwrite my notes. I was able to sit with her. She was in London at the time, and I had an hour or so just to ask her any questions I had wanted. Ever since then, I've had numerous, these are all different interviews from Holocaust survivors and liberators. It's kind of taken off from there. I will say that about a year ago, I was getting kind of concerned. I'm like, oh, I've got all this information. I have all of these interviews I've done with people, and there's got to be some type of Holocaust or Jewish community, something in Champaign-Urbana. There just has to be. And so I Googled it, and sure enough, there was an event coming. A Courage to Remember exhibit was coming to the Mattoon Mall. And I had reached out to Dr. Brian Kahn, my now good friend Brian, and I had asked him, "Hey, would you mind if I volunteered?" And within like 10 minutes, he had emailed me back, "Where did you come from? But absolutely, you may help us out." And so he's kind of been stuck with me ever since. And this past December, I was offered the position as the committee chair. So Brian's kind of retiring and taking a step back, and now I'm taking a step forward.
That explains your history and how you became the committee chair. What are you hoping to accomplish? I know you want to continue the work that Brian started, but you're going to make this your own. What is your goal for this group?
My biggest goal is to volunteer, obviously, and provide whatever resources I can to specifically the Champaign-Urbana community and then hopefully beyond. My most recent or upcoming work is I do professional development days for free for teachers, and that's in coordination with the Illinois State Holocaust and Genocide Mandate. So I kind of teach teachers how to teach the Holocaust, which is kind of silly and kind of weird to think about considering I've never been a teacher. But I have had a lot of experience and a lot of research with how to teach these topics and how to make sure that they are age appropriate and what is the best approach for your class. Another thing I would really like to do for this community is make sure that it's known. Had I not Googled that event, I don't think I would even know that CUJF existed, which is crazy to think about. But I would really like to just get the word out there that we are here to make a presence and we are available for all sorts of education needs regarding the Holocaust.
When you go out and talk to teachers and kids, is there any particular memory that stands out? A light bulb going off in someone's mind? What you're telling them is just horrific, and yet they need to do something with this information going forward.
Actually, yes. About a week ago, we had our Courage to Remember Auschwitz exhibit at Eastern Illinois University. And I had some college students that were taking notes, and I had overheard one of them ask the other one, "Why is Auschwitz the only place we hear of?" And she had looked at her confused and said, "Well, I've never heard of this before." And I was kind of taken aback. Like I got the breath just sucked out of me because it was so crazy to think that she had never heard of that. And so I had spent some time after they had viewed the exhibit getting to talk with these young ladies. And I think I had spent maybe an hour and a half just going over different facts and things that I had known and answering any questions they had. And then they were excited to go back and tell other students at the university to come and view the exhibit. One of my most recent experiences was at Franklin Middle School here in Champaign-Urbana. They host a Holocaust exhibit each year. They're eighth grade students. One of my good friends, her mom was a Holocaust survivor, Basha, who had survived Auschwitz as a teenager. And recently we're getting ready to place an order and add these to our book trunks that we have for the classes. But one of the students had asked me about Basha and asked if she was real because they just couldn't believe that some 14-year-old had experienced what she had at Auschwitz. And so that's another comment that kind of stuck with me, is just how unbelievable it is for students to grasp the concept that this really happened to people and people their age.
One of the questions I'm assuming that you get often is, how could this have happened? What are some of the other questions that you get from not just kids, but adults too, about the Holocaust?
That's definitely one of them, is how did this happen? Or why didn't they fight back? That's a huge question I get. And honestly, it's one of my favorite to get to answer because it's not necessarily true. And I get to explain to them what it means to be a resistor. And so tomorrow I get to teach at the Education 201 course at the University of Illinois. And I am going to be talking about my own discovery, which is my own family member. Her name was Erica Bookman. Her maiden name was Schellenbrook, which is my mom's maiden name. It's on my mom's side of the family. And she was labeled as a communist. She was labeled as Jewish, even though I can't find any proof that she was. And she was labeled as relapsing. She went to the concentration camp Ravensbrück 3 separate times. And initially, Ravensbrück was set up as a detention center for women. It wasn't initially set up for people that were Jewish, but it was set up for German women that did not follow Hitler's ideology. So they had labeled her as relapsing. She didn't believe in the Hitler regime. Then they had labeled her as a communist, and they kept sending her back. And the third and final time, and what made her stay there until liberation, was labeling her as a Jewish woman. Some things I had found out about her were featured in the book by Sarah Helm called Ravensbrück, Life and Death in Hitler's Concentration Camp for Women. And then her other book, which is called If This Is a Man, I was listening to it on Audible, and I had heard this woman, Erica Bookman, and I had looked it up, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm related to her. Why she's a resistor and why I'm excited to get to share her tomorrow is at Ravensbrück, there were these women considered the Ravensbrück rabbits. And many of the camp doctors there would conduct experiments on women, and they would inject these women with all kinds of different bacteria, trying to replicate what a wound would be on a soldier. This was pre-antibiotic days, and the antibiotics they had, they definitely weren't using on these women. And towards the end, when the Soviets were getting closer to liberating Ravensbrück, and the Germans knew this, they were set to kill off these women. And they didn't want any witnesses to their crimes. Well, Erica had gotten a list of about 16 to 17 women that were considered the Ravensbrück rabbits, and traded their names of already deceased prisoners and hid, with the help of other women, it wasn't just her, these women in barracks. She had taken their uniforms and swapped them out. They hid them in attics. They hid them in wherever they could hide these 16 women. And they survived in order to go to the Nuremberg trials and go take these men and hold them accountable for what they did. So getting to explain that it wasn't just Jewish people that were affected at the Holocaust, but this was an act of resistance and was something that somebody did that wasn't just fighting back, but it was something that gave them a reason to live for. I have, actually, and it's been kind of crazy in the comment sections on social media. And I've also been lucky enough to get an answer of what to say to these people from Dr. William Gingold, who's also been a part of the podcast. The propaganda, if that's what you would want to call it, and all of the pictures we have from this time period were taken by Nazi Germany and were taken by Nazis. And the other question is, what do I have to gain out of lying or telling the story of the Holocaust? I'm certainly not being paid for anything I do. So there's no monetary value in doing so. Another thing I also think about is one of my friends, when I was in 8th grade, was visiting the United States Holocaust Museum and Memorial in Washington, D.C., when an active shooter was there and shot and killed the security guard. And he was a white supremacist and Holocaust denier. I'm hoping I get to interview him as well for my book down the road. It hits very close to home. And while it hasn't necessarily happened to me in person yet, knock on wood, it is something I'm prepared for. Every single day, I love to wear my Star of David necklace. My husband bought it for me before I gave my first volunteer event in Mattoon. And I'm not Jewish, but I do attend temple and I've gone to several services. And people ask, why do I wear that? It's because if somebody's going to be racist or anti Semitic, I rather they do it to me. I can take it, I don't mind. Or answer any questions they might have and just prove that it's not something scary and not something unknown. Growing up in a small town, I had no experience with another Jewish person before. And so getting to be a part of the Champaign-Urbana Jewish Federation has really opened a lot of doors for me and been a great breath of fresh air to realize that they're not different.
I'm glad you opened that door because I started writing a question about the fact that you aren't Jewish about 5 different times, and I wasn't sure how to phrase it without sounding rude or intrusive. So, what are some of the things, the comments that you get when people say, why are you, with the emphasis on you, teaching about the Holocaust when you aren't Jewish?
A lot of times I go back to my family member that I had just discovered, which was in March, and that you don't have to be Jewish to be against anti Semitism. You don't have to be Black to be against racism. And there's been several times I asked my husband or I asked Dr. Khan, I'm like, I don't think I should be here. I'm not, it's a big club, but I'm not in this club. And every single time I'm usually answered with the same question of, we want you here. We need you here. And when I was a volunteer fireman, one of my captains used to say, there is a whole community out there that needs your resources, your background, your knowledge. And for you to not share that would be doing a disservice to your community. And while I'm no longer an EMT or a paramedic or a firefighter, I now look at my knowledge in the Holocaust. And for me to not share that would feel very selfish. And for me to not offer what I can in my time to volunteer feels selfish.
Your Holocaust Education Center committee, you mentioned it's a big tent. It is a small committee. It is mighty, though. And I know that funding is something that's hard to come by. What is it that you need? Do you need volunteers? Do you need donations? What exactly do you want from the public?
I absolutely need volunteers. I take any and all help I can get. And we, of course, always take donations. Any donations I get go right back into our Holocaust Education Committee. Most recently, we had a donation to provide these Holocaust education, we call them book trunks. And it's basically just a Rubbermaid tote and it's full of pre-selected books for classes in schools. But we had a donation that's going to provide book trunks to every single school in Vermilion County. And that is a county that I have not had much connection with. And I am so incredibly grateful and so excited to get to put together these books and order these books for these students and just know that we're going beyond Champaign-Urbana and beyond Champaign County is such an incredible feeling and experience.
One day, the children of Vermilion County and the entire state will be reading Voices of Survival, which happens to be the book you're working on. What led to the idea for this book? Who did you interview? Tell me a little bit about it.
Voices of Survival is a book that I am working on, and it's been a work in progress for almost 4 years now. And it initially started through my therapist, and I didn't think I would ever go anywhere with interviewing. Like I said, I had started with Ava Schloss. I went and interviewed another Holocaust survivor. Her name is Ronnie Benson. I had interviewed Command Sergeant Major Henry Armstrong, who was 98 years old. I just started collecting these, and my therapist was like, well, it's kind of creepy. Some people collect, Funko Pops and you collect trauma stories. And I said, well, again, I don't feel like I belong. He's like, you can't compare two traumas. But one of the things that I had learned from Ava was talking about, and I'll quote it from her book, recovering from traumatic events and loss is such a slow and gradual process that at the time you can hardly recognize your snail's pace back into normality. And so over time, as I interviewed more and more survivors, I realized I needed to do something with them. And I obviously, with their permission, am putting it together for other people to hopefully learn and read from their stories and their experiences. These are people that, yes, Ava does have a book published, but Command Sergeant Major Henry Armstrong or Ronnie Benson or Conrad Weiner, none of these people have really shared their stories before. And I'm lucky enough that they felt comfortable enough to share that with me. So again, I feel like I would be doing a disservice to kind of keep those to myself.
When do you think your book will be done?
That is hard to tell. I'm really hoping this May. I graduate this May, and I'm actually almost 20 weeks pregnant. So hopefully before the baby gets here.
Congratulations. I did not know that. This might be an odd question, but I've heard this from EMT friends that when you go on a call and something is hugely traumatic, a part of you has to compartmentalize your own personal sensitivities away so that you can just focus on what's in front of you. Is that also a coping mechanism that you do in order to absorb some of these Holocaust stories?
It is. And I find myself, not just in their stories, but reading any type of Holocaust history, putting myself in their shoes. And I am extremely empathetic to just reading about their experiences or hearing about the things that they had experienced during this time. And there are sometimes I have to kind of separate myself from what's going on with reality. Again, I do go to therapy, so that helps with a lot, but just kind of learning different coping mechanisms. And I don't know, I've always thought if they've had the strength to share these with me, whether it's taken them 40 years or 60 years to do so, that they're kind of passing the torch or they're kind of sharing that trauma experience, if that makes sense.
You're relatable. You're easy to talk to. I could see them wanting to open up to you.
I don't consider myself easy to talk to. Just recently, I was at an event at the Skokie, Illinois Holocaust Museum, and I was supposed to go meet with one of the directors, and I ended up meeting this young, she was in her 50s or 60s, this Jewish woman from Chicago. Didn't know her from Adam, and I spent 2 or 3 hours talking with her.
With the rise in anti-Semitism, which seems to have intensified, of course it's not new, what do you want people to take away from a lesson or story about the atrocities of the Holocaust and how it relates to current day issues? What is the number one thing that you hope people walk away thinking about after you've spoken to them?
One thing I really want people to take away is you don't have to be Jewish to be against anti-Semitism. And I know I've mentioned that earlier in the podcast, but I really want them to realize that we're not that different and that if we could just come together. I know that sounds so cliche and that sounds so like easier said than done, but honestly, if we realize that we're not that different from each other and that, we're all just in this together as a society, I think we'd get accomplish a lot more. And I mean that is a whole as a community. Seeing things that have happened recently, I know with, for example, what's happening here in Champaign at their town hall meetings or even here in Urbana. I just wish there was a way to sit down and compromise and understand each other's differences and that it's not that different.
If somebody is inspired and listening to this podcast and wants to volunteer or wants to connect with somebody on the committee, what's the best way for somebody to do that?
Absolutely. They can reach out to our website, so starting with cujf.org, or you can reach out to our email for CUJF is hec@cujf.org, and that'll get a hold of me, that'll get a hold of our community engagement coordinator, and if you need a more personal email for me, it is courtneys@hec@gmail.com.
Courtney Smith, thank you so much for being part of the Champaign-Urbana Jewish Federation Holocaust Education Series. I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I look forward to getting to hear the rest of the podcast when they come out.